All right, we've talked a little bit about the soft justice system that we have in Canada, and that is so evident as we talk about this next story out of British Columbia, where an arsonist is now out on bail, of course, released on bail, catch and release that we hear so much about here in
Yeah.
Canada, after setting fire to a British Columbia church. Drea, you're in British Columbia. You've been covering this since the fallout of the residential school claim of 215 unmarked graves. They've now been referred to as anomalies. Do you want to run through what's happening here in British Columbia with these church fire, with this particular church fire?
Well, I would love to. I'm just having some difficulties, Tamara, so
Oh, no,
sorry. I'm going
that's
to have to
okay.
get you.
So
But
this man here in Vernon, British Columbia, allegedly set fires outside of a Catholic church, and his name is Dylan Alexander Leon. He's 32. He's facing one count each of mischief over 5,000 and possession of incendiary material. He was arrested on Monday night, and there he was back on the streets, granted bail after a hearing on Tuesday afternoon. And so I think this is upwards of 100 churches now that have been targeted since, as I mentioned, that claim of there being 215 unmarked child graves at a residential school location. I won't even attempt to say the name of the band. Drea, you do it so well.
yeah,
The
yeah,
Kamloops.
the
Swim
swim it. Yeah. I say it with confidence, and then that means I'm saying it right. But yeah, you pretty much did it right. But yeah, it's over 100 churches. Another one of those things that gets swept under the rug when it comes to actual hate in Canada. Of course, every single church that was, caught fire wasn't. I did a report on the CBC where they focused on like the ones that weren't, but the vast majority are, it's safe to say connected to an attack of hate, but nobody wants to talk about that. And BC is where the church burning spree started. Mm-hmm. And as you can see, it's still happening here. And some of the churches that have burned, they're not even investigating them. Like there's the one that I covered, the old log church in Chicolton, and that person had committed crimes before, and he went out and burnt a church too. And they focused on the other sort of things that he did that night instead of, hey, what about this? So it's a very sick and concerning pattern when you see this attack happen on any place of worship, but it is a focus attack that gets ignored. And in BC, you get these slaps on the wrist so you can go out and do it again.
Well, exactly. That's the justice system, the catch and release policies that we have in place here. The police, I repeatedly hear just how frustrated they are with arresting, detaining, and charging these individuals only for them to be put in front of a judge and released back out into the streets to very likelihood of reoffend on as they're released on bail. And
but it says he's banned from having a lighter, so it's all good now.
Well, and these are beautiful, absolutely beautiful, historic, irreplaceable architecture churches that are being destroyed over a false claim. And I think that is quite literally the definition of misinformation. And it has been allowed, pun intended, to spread like wildfire with no real corrections to the record other than that court case, actually, Drea, that you just covered. I believe your report went out yesterday or is going out later today.
Yeah, I think it goes out today. But
yeah, and so I urge everyone to check that out when it is published and live. But that was a really interesting court case where the judge pushed back and said alleged, or what was the word that he used?
Yeah, I mean, it might be up now, but basically it was brought to my attention this an appeal. This went all the way to appeal where they alleged that the judge engaged in residential school denialism and was biased because during the sentencing hearing, a Judge Fitzpatrick when the counsel for this criminal who had breached the Trans Mountain Pipeline injunction, they were talking about, they've done volunteer work to help with the 215 bodies that were discovered at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. And so Judge Fitzpatrick says, well, I don't think they were unearthed. And then there's this dialogue. So I go through it all. But basically, because the judge corrected the record as a judge should do and made sure the facts were correct as they're being said to the court, and said, no, it's potential remains, and not even remains, potential burials, they actually took that to appeal to say she was biased and a denialist. And it actually was heard. I mean, we've covered cases that don't even get heard. Like if you're a school trustee like Barry Newfield and you're getting all of these things said about you because you're standing against the sexual orientation, gender identity stuff going in schools, you don't get your appeal heard. And then this goes all the way. And thankfully, it was an Indigenous judge, Chief Justice, who oversaw that and dismissed that case. But it's quite radical that a false claim could be made 3 years later, 100 burnt, vandalized churches, $7.9 million given to the band that made the false claim for the discovery that never was. And now it's in our courts. We have actual lawyers hear a judge correct the record and say, hey, no, there was no body. And that same lawyer thinks that it's a good argument to go to the appeals because they still can't even find the truth. I'm assuming they looked online and went, oh, CBC says it's real, so it must be true.
What a sad state of affairs here in Canada. And, we are repeatedly scolded on spreading misinformation and disinformation. And this is a huge point of contention within this story because that is textbook mis and disinformation, and information that is shared with the intent to deceive. And it is a very sad state of affairs that people aren't able to sift through the information on their own. And it just shows the stranglehold that the mainstream media still has on the general population that is unable to go out and seek and information gather on their own, which, I mean, if you have a functioning media that's unbiased, that's reporting the facts and sticking to them, then you don't necessarily need to go out and information gather on your own because you have a trustworthy, reliable media source. And sadly, the mainstream media and our state broadcaster just isn't that anymore.